Sarah stared in stunned silence as the bank officer slammed the door on her desperate loan request, a war widow denied by the very system meant to protect her. Cold eyes, whispered excuses, a future slipping through her fingers. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Sarah sat rigidly in the faded green chair of the bank's cramped office, the sterile hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a relentless echo of rejection. Across from her, Mark Reynolds shuffled papers with mechanical detachment, avoiding eye contact as if her presence alone was an inconvenient disruption. His clipped tone, measured, rehearsed, struck her like a slap. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Mitchell, but your application doesn't meet our lending criteria at this time." His fingers tapped a rhythm of finality on the desk, but it wasn't the official line that stung. It was the way he said it, the unspoken message lurking beneath his words, "You're not worth the risk." Sarah's heart clenched. She forced herself to breathe slowly, fighting the urge to lash out. Instead, she pushed back gently but firmly. "Mark, my husband served his country with honor. I pay every bill on time. My income might be less than before, but the military pension keeps us afloat. What exactly makes my family risky to your bank?" Mark's face tightened ever so slightly, a flicker of discomfort that he quickly masked. "It's just standard policy. We have to be cautious, especially with smaller branches like this one. The local economy isn't as stable as it used to be. We have to protect the bank's interests. And honestly, I'm under pressure from headquarters to tighten lending." The thin veil dropped, the cold calculus of corporate bottom lines, the cold disregard for the family behind the numbers. Sarah's chest tightened, rage coiling inside her like a live wire. She looked at the man before her, a man who wore a badge of professional civility, but whose eyes betrayed a lack of empathy. She imagined the countless veterans and their families who must have walked in with hope, only to be met with this same cold wall. "How many veterans' families have you turned away like this?" she asked quietly, voice trembling but fierce. "How many times have you let policy stand in the way of honoring sacrifices made by people like my husband?" Mark swallowed, the silence in the room stretching thick and uncomfortable. He had no answer, or maybe the answer was too ugly to admit aloud. Sarah's mind flashed to Jake, his broad smile, the pride he carried in his uniform, the promises he made to come home and build a life for their children. She pictured their two little girls, Emily and Claire, waiting for dinner at the table, oblivious to the battle their mother was about to face, not overseas, but here at home. The injustice of it burned fiercely. Here she was, standing on the edge of despair, asking for a simple lifeline and being cast aside. Her hands clenched into fists in her lap. The pain of loss, already raw and suffocating, deepened with this added wound. But alongside that pain was an undeniable fury, an indignation at a system that claimed to serve community, yet turned its back on those who had given the most. Sarah's voice rose, breaking the quiet. "This isn't just about a loan, it's about respect, about dignity, and right now this bank has shown neither." Mark shifted uneasily, glancing at the door as if seeking escape from the confrontation. "Look, Mrs. Mitchell, I understand you're going through a tough time, but I have to follow the rules." "Your rules," Sarah said bitterly, "don't apply to everyone equally. They're twisted to protect profits, not people." The weight of her words hung in the room. She rose slowly, her posture steady but fierce. "I came here asking for help, respect for my family's sacrifice. Instead, I'm met with suspicion and cold policy. That's the true cost of your protection." As she turned to leave, a wave of exhaustion crashed over her. Not just physical fatigue, but the soul-crushing reality that even those sworn to serve communities could deny the very people who deserved compassion most. Her reflection in the bank's glass door looked back at her, determined, broken, angry, but unwilling to be silenced. Outside, the gray Ohio sky matched the weight on her shoulders. But buried beneath the shock and the pain was a flicker of resolve. This was not the end. It could not be. For Jake, for Emily, for Claire. Sarah would find another way. The battle was far from over. The moment the story of Sarah Mitchell's rejected loan reached the National Veterans Foundation, a flame of outrage ignited deep within Tom Harper's chest. For years, Tom had dedicated himself to bridging the chasm between veterans' sacrifices and a society that often turned its back when help was most needed. Hearing that a war widow, someone who had already borne the harshest cost of service, was dismissed with cold, corporate indifference was more than an affront. It was a betrayal of everything the Foundation stood for. Tom's voice cracked as he relayed the news to his closest allies, a storm gathering behind each word. This isn't just about Sarah. It's about every veteran's family that's been discarded by institutions meant to support them. We can't let this slide. The room pulsed with urgency. No longer could compassion be relegated to charity alone. This was a call to arms against an entrenched system that hid behind policy and profit. Within days, a coalition began to form, a patchwork of veterans, military spouses, community activists, and financial supporters galvanized by the injustice. Flyers were printed, social media campaigns launched, and local community centers hosted meetings. The Foundation tapped into its network, mobilizing people who had witnessed similar struggles firsthand, whose stories mirrored Sarah's. A flood of donations poured in, each dollar a tangible vote against the cold calculus that had rejected Sarah. The Foundation's reach grew as local news outlets caught wind of the story, framing it not as a solitary incident, but a systemic failure. Cameras caught Tom's impassioned speeches, footage of Sarah with her children, and footage of the aging bank branch, its faded sign a symbol of a community caught in economic decline yet forsaking its own. Despite the mounting public pressure, Mark Reynolds remained resolute. To him, the loan denial was a matter of sound business judgment. He viewed the Foundation's campaign as emotional blackmail, a threat to the carefully balanced scales of risk and responsibility he had sworn to uphold. "I understand the sentiment," he told a reporter, "but our obligation is to the bank and its long-term viability. Personal stories, however tragic, can't override financial prudence." Behind the polished surface of his statements, Mark was trapped, torn between his professional duty and the gnawing awareness that the system he defended was failing a grieving family. Yet he refused to yield. To compromise, in his mind, was to invite chaos into a fragile branch struggling against economic headwinds. Tom, however, saw things differently. He recognized the power of creative resistance. If the bank's financial struggles were at the core of the rejection, why not address that root problem directly? The idea sparked in a late-night strategy session, voices low but determined. What if we bought the branch, paid off the mortgage ourselves? That would free them from the pressure to reject loans like Sarah's. Then we could insist on fair lending policies that honor veterans and their families. The plan was bold, audacious even, but it struck a chord. The coalition rallied again, now with renewed focus and purpose. Fundraisers transformed into calls for ownership, a grassroots campaign to wrest control of the bank branch from the corporate grip that had allowed such injustice. Veterans donated not just money, but time, their collective energy a forceful rebuke to the cold institutional indifference they had endured. Letters poured into local officials, demanding accountability. Petitions circulated, amassing signatures that represented more than numbers. They were voices rising from the margins, refusing to be silenced. Every dollar raised symbolized a stake in reclaiming dignity for families like Sarah's. In the midst of this swelling movement, Sarah herself found a fragile thread of hope weaving through the turmoil. The weight of her loss still pressed heavy, but the flood of support reminded her she was not alone. Each rally, each news story, was a reminder that her fight had become part of something larger, a collective stand against a system that had let her fall. The stakes had escalated far beyond a single loan application. This was now a battle for the soul of the community, a reckoning with how those who bore the scars of war were treated in peace. The Veterans Foundation, armed with determination and ingenuity, had turned a moment of personal despair into a catalyst for change, a challenge laid bare at the feet of a bank forced to confront its own contradictions. And Mark Reynolds, once unyielding, found himself caught in a growing storm that no policy memo could quell, a storm fueled by voices long ignored, demanding not just loans, but justice. The morning the mortgage statement arrived, marked paid in full, the bank's leadership was struck silent, as if the very foundations beneath them had shifted without warning. Overnight, the balance that once weighed heavily on the branch was erased, not by internal maneuvering or cautious fiscal policy, but by a coalition united in purpose, the National Veterans Foundation. The debt that had chained the bank to risk-averse conservatism, suffocating its ability to serve the community, was suddenly gone, replaced by an unmistakable call to accountability. Mark Reynolds, once the unyielding gatekeeper of credit policies and cautious business logic, now faced an irrevocable shift in power. The quiet authority he wielded through spreadsheets and credit assessments had been upended by a force far more potent: community resolve. The neighborhood he served, long patient, yet wearied by quiet dismissals and subtle exclusions, no longer accepted his rationalizations as valid. The narrative had changed, from one of cold calculation to a collective demand for justice. For Mark, the pressure was unrelenting. Internal memos began circulating, filled with pointed reminders of the Foundation's influence and the growing public scrutiny. The media spotlight that once illuminated Sarah Mitchell's struggle now shone directly on the bank's refusal to adapt. Every delay, every refusal to reconsider became a headline, a growing blemish on the institution's reputation. The bank's board convened urgently, recognizing that maintaining the old stance was a liability far greater than any financial risk the loan itself might have posed. The optics of denying aid to a war widow while being freed from mortgage debt by the very community it claimed to serve was a contradiction that could no longer be tolerated. The tide of public opinion, empowered by the Foundation's grassroots campaign, demanded action. In a historic reversal, the bank formally approved Sarah's loan. The announcement came with an added commitment: the creation of a dedicated Veterans Assistance Program, designed to ensure that families who had borne the cost of service would never again face the cold dismissal Sarah endured. This program promised tailored financial support, advisory services, and advocacy designed to bridge the gap between veterans' unique circumstances and institutional bureaucracy. Sarah's reaction was profound, a mixture of relief, disbelief, and overwhelming gratitude. The weight of months' worth of struggle lifted, replaced by a cautious but fierce optimism. She spoke publicly, her voice steady but charged with emotion. "This is not just my victory. It's a testament to the power of community, to the strength we find when we stand together against injustice. Jake's sacrifice was never meant to be forgotten, and this second chance is for him, for our children, and for every family fighting in the shadows." For Sarah, the loan was more than financial aid. It was a tangible lifeline to rebuild a future, to transform pain into possibility. It was a chance to retrain, to work toward a stable career, to provide security where uncertainty had ruled for too long. But beyond personal healing, her triumph became a symbol, a beacon to veterans everywhere that resilience and solidarity could dismantle even the most stubborn barriers. Tom Harper's campaign, born from indignation and honed by strategic vision, quickly transcended local boundaries. News of the mortgage payoff and subsequent policy shift rippled across the nation, inspiring veterans organizations and communities to replicate the model. Town halls convened, advocacy groups mobilized, and legislative efforts gained momentum, all galvanized by the example set in a small Ohio town where a widow's fight ignited a movement. The story resonated deeply because it was not merely about financial transactions or policy changes. It was about dignity restored, about a society finally reckoning with the real costs of war and the ongoing responsibilities owed to those who serve. Veterans found renewed pride, communities discovered the power of collective voice, and institutions were reminded that they must evolve or lose the trust of those they purport to serve. In the end, Sarah's fight transcended her personal ordeal. It became a clarion call for justice, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who sacrifice. Her journey, from rejection to triumph, underscored a universal truth. Entrenched systems may resist change, but when people unite with conviction and purpose, even the most rigid structures can bend and ultimately transform.